The rehearsal hall smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood. I carried a small box of decorations, ones I had been asked to deliver earlier that afternoon. My hands shook from the rush of errands, and as I shifted the weight, a single vase tipped over. The flowers slid across the table and toppled onto the floor with a dull thud. I bent quickly to fix it, embarrassed but calm, certain it was nothing more than a slip. Before I could straighten, Lucas's voice cut through the air like glass. "Mom, it's better if you don't come to the wedding." The room went still. Erin glanced at me, then down at her phone, choosing silence, as though that would soften the blow. My chest tightened, but I stayed crouched, gathering stems with careful fingers. I wanted to believe I had misheard him, that fatigue had twisted his words. But when I looked up, his face was hard. His jaw set. He meant it. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up sewing costumes for his school plays, the meals I'd skipped so he could have enough for his sports trips, the day I sold my grandmother's necklace to cover his tuition deposit. They all gathered like shadows behind his simple, merciless sentence. I didn't ask why. I didn't argue or plead. My lips pressed into a line, the kind that kept everything locked inside. I set the vase back upright, placed the box of centerpieces on the nearest chair, and straightened my back. The air seemed heavy, but my steps were steady as I walked across the room. On the counter by the door lay the spare keys to his house, the ones I'd used to help with deliveries all week. I slid them forward, the metal ringing faintly against the wood. No one stopped me. No one spoke. The door clicked shut behind me, a quiet punctuation that said more than I ever could. Outside, the evening sun was fading, throwing long shadows across the parking lot. I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back, already knowing that when the wedding day came, I would not be there. But I would still see everything. The morning of the wedding, the house was quiet. I had woken before dawn, restless pacing from room to room, as if something might tether me to the life I used to know. My dress still hung in the closet, pressed and waiting, though now it felt like an artifact from someone else's story. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table staring at the steam rising from the cup until the screen of my laptop pulled me back. A friend from work had promised to stream the ceremony for me. When the feed went live, the image was shaky voices, faint but clear enough. The church was crowded, guests settling into pews, music filling the air. My heart clenched as I caught a glimpse of Lucas at the altar. He looked every bit the man I raised, tall, steady, sure of himself. For a moment, pride flickered through me, only to be extinguished by the memory of his words 2 nights earlier. When Erin appeared radiant in her gown, the room erupted in admiration. I watched in silence, hands wrapped tightly around my mug as they exchanged vows. The screen buffered once or twice, but not enough to spare me from what came next. After the kiss, after the applause, Lucas took the microphone for the customary thanks. He spoke warmly about Erin's family, their support, their generosity, the love they had shown him since the beginning. He lingered on every detail, every kindness, as though it had been a lifetime of belonging. But my name never left his lips. Not a mention, not a nod, not even a glance at the camera, where he might have known I was watching. The silence cut deeper than any insult could. It wasn't anger, I felt it was erasure, plain and final. I set the mug down my hand, trembling only slightly. In that absence, in that deliberate omission, something inside me shifted. I had spent years trying to earn a place in a family that had already written me out. Now, watching the applause fade and the camera wobble toward the reception, I understood that if I was invisible to them, I no longer needed to remain tethered. After the live stream ended, I sat in the stillness of my kitchen, the sound of the applause still echoing faintly in my ears. My hands rested on the table, empty now, without the cup to cling to. My mind wandered backward through the years that had carried me to this moment. I remembered the years of double shifts, mornings at the office, and nights scrubbing floors just to keep the lights on. I used to come home exhausted, slipping off my shoes in the dark so Lucas wouldn't wake. I told myself it was worth it every time I saw him sleeping soundly in his small bed, a toy car still clutched in his hand. There were the heirlooms, rings, a watch, a necklace passed down through my family. I sold them one by one, never out of recklessness, always with a purpose. Tuition payments, uniforms, the down payment on his first apartment. I told myself things could be replaced. Opportunities for him could not. I had offers once, chances to build something more for myself. A job in Chicago, a man who asked me to marry again. I said no each time because Lucas needed me here, because any distraction felt like betrayal. I chose him again and again, believing he would understand someday what it cost. But as the memories stacked up, they began to feel less like stories of love and more like entries in a ledger, each sacrifice a number in a column that was never balanced. I thought of the nights alone, the meals skipped, the dreams abandoned. Every line led to this moment, my son in his finest hour, standing tall beside the woman he loved and choosing to pretend I did not exist. The truth pressed against me like a weight. All I had given had not built me a place in his life. It had simply freed him to walk away without looking back. I closed the laptop, the blank screen reflecting my face. For the first time, I saw the cost not as invisible, but written clear as ink. And with that recognition came the faintest stir of resolve, a whisper that I no longer had to keep paying. The house felt colder when I shut the laptop and stood. Every room seemed too quiet, each shadow stretching longer than it should. I moved through the hallway until I reached the cabinet where I kept all the paperwork of my life, neatly stacked folders, envelopes worn at the edges from being handled too often. I carried the box to the table and began sorting. There was the deed to my house still in my name, bank records from years past showing every deposit, every transfer, and then the joint account I had opened years ago, thinking it would help Lucas learn responsibility. My hands trembled as I traced the columns of withdrawals. Month after month his name appeared, not in emergencies, not with explanation, just quiet siphoning. Vacations, dinners, payments I never questioned. I could feel the sting of betrayal rising, but instead of despair, something steadier came over me. I wasn't blind. I had chosen to ignore the pattern because I wanted to believe I was helping him stand tall. But looking at the numbers now, I saw the truth. He hadn't leaned on me out of need, he had simply grown comfortable expecting me to fill the gaps. I pressed the papers flat against the table and let out a long breath. For years I had been the safety net, the one who caught him whenever he slipped. Yet when the time came for him to offer me even a sliver of grace, he chose to cast me out. I pushed the folders back into the box, but not with the same resignation as before. A strange clarity filled me. If they wanted me gone, then I would go, but not as the discarded woman they imagined. I would vanish on my own terms. The thought did not scare me. It steadied me. I looked at the keys still sitting by the door, the house around me, the bank accounts I had funded. All of it was mine to decide. And by morning, I already knew the first step would be to find someone who could help me make the break clean. The next morning I woke with a strange steadiness, as though the decision had been waiting for me all along. I dressed, simply gathered the box of papers, and drove downtown to the office of a lawyer I'd once met at a community fundraiser. His name was Daniel Reeves, and though we had only spoken briefly years before, I remembered his calm assurance. He listened without interrupting, as I laid everything out, Lucas's withdrawals, the joint account, the years of silence culminating in the words that finally broke me. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, "You're entitled to protect what's yours." The process was straightforward. The joint account could be frozen, leaving only documented family expenses eligible to be drawn. By the time I left his office, the account was locked, and with it, the easy access Lucas had always taken for granted. From there, I drove to a realtor's office across town. I told them I wanted a quick sale, no fuss, no drawn-out negotiations. The agent raised her brows at the price I was willing to accept, but she agreed to move fast. I didn't care about squeezing every last dollar out of the house. I only cared about leaving it behind. On my way home, I called my employer. 9 years at that bookkeeping desk ended in a 10-minute conversation. I cited personal reasons, promised to send a resignation letter by email, and hung up before the guilt could creep in. Back at the house, I pulled out 2 suitcases. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to carry everything forward. I chose carefully my laptop, my journals, a few outfits. Everything else could stay: the furniture, the dishes, even the framed photos that once lined the shelves. I didn't cry. I folded each item with care, zipped the cases shut, and placed them by the door. The silence in the house no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a pause waiting for me to move. And by nightfall, I was already mapping the road that would take me away from everything I had known. I left before sunrise, the 2 suitcases fitting easily into the back seat of my car. The house sat in silence as I pulled away its windows, dark, its walls holding years I no longer needed to carry. I didn't leave a note, didn't send a message. There was nothing left to explain. The highway stretched out like a ribbon, endless and quiet. I drove east mile after mile, the sun slowly rising at my back. At rest stops, I bought coffee in paper cups, the bitter taste keeping me awake. I watched families gather at picnic tables, couples taking turns behind the wheel, children tugging on their parents' sleeves. I sat alone in the corner of diners, listening to the hum of voices that belonged to lives I was no longer part of. At night, I stopped at small motels with flickering signs and worn carpets. I slept lightly, waking often, the silence pressing against me. Grief followed me into every room, the sharp knowledge that I had left behind the sun I had once built my world around. But alongside the grief was something new, something fragile and unfamiliar: freedom. For the first time, no one expected me to answer a call, cook a meal, or fix a mistake. The days blurred together, rain on the windshield, radio stations fading in and out, long stretches of pine trees and empty fields. With each passing mile, the weight on my chest eased. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving until the past felt far enough away. After a week of driving, I reached the coast of Maine. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, the horizon a wide expanse of gray-blue water. I stopped in a town called Clearwater, small enough to feel hidden alive, enough to remind me I was still here. A notice in a cafe window led me to a weathered cottage for rent, its porch facing the marsh. I signed the lease using my middle name, Elise. It felt strange at first, but as I slid the key into my pocket, I realized I was already learning how to live as someone new. Clearwater moved at a slower rhythm than any place I'd ever lived. The mornings were filled with gulls circling above the harbor, the afternoons with shopkeepers sweeping their doorsteps, and the evenings with the hush of the tide. I kept mostly to myself at first, learning the streets, buying groceries, and watching the world go on without asking who I was. One afternoon, I ducked into a cafe for coffee and noticed a woman at the corner table surrounded by binders, swatches of fabric, and a laptop open to a guest list. She looked about my age, her hair pulled back loosely, her expression a mixture of concentration and weariness. I ordered my drink, and when I passed her table, one of her folders slid to the floor. I bent to pick it up, handing it back with a smile. That small gesture turned into a conversation. Her name was Dana, a wedding planner who specialized in helping couples with limited budgets. She laughed when she said, Around here, everyone wants a dream wedding, but not everyone can afford one. Something in her words struck me. Weddings, the very thing that had broken me, sat at the center of her work. I almost excused myself, but she asked about me, and before I realized it, I admitted I had once spent months helping with my sons. She leaned forward, curious. If you ever want to lend a hand, I could use it. These little details are impossible alone. At first, I hesitated. The thought of arranging flowers or setting tables felt like stepping into an old wound. But a week later, when she called and asked if I could help set up for a small ceremony in a park, I agreed. The work was simple: folding chairs, arranging ribbons, checking the playlist. Yet, as I moved through the tasks, I felt a steady calm. Dana noticed my eye for detail and said, "You have a touch for this." For the first time in months, I believed it. By evening, the couple had exchanged vows beneath a canopy of trees, smiling at each other like the world was theirs. I stood at the edge, unseen, but I felt something shift inside me, a thread pulling me forward into something new. The first job with Dana turned into another, and then another. Soon I was spending most weekends helping her with small ceremonies, backyard vows, park gatherings, receptions in barns strung with borrowed lights. I learned how to anchor flowers so they wouldn't wilt in the sun, how to calm a bride whose dress had torn at the hem, how to coax laughter out of groomsmen who forgot their lines. Each time the work felt less like labor and more like healing. My hands, once criticized for being clumsy, became steady in arranging bouquets. My voice, once silenced at family tables, now soothed couples trembling with nerves. I began to breathe easier, the old weight on my chest slowly loosening with every ribbon tied, every candle lit. Dana noticed the change too. One afternoon, as we packed up after a lakeside ceremony, she said, "You belong in this, Elise. People feel safe around you." The words caught me off guard. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone told me I was good at something that I mattered. It was the couples, though, who taught me the most. They weren't wealthy, not polished, but they loved fiercely. They thanked me with hugs, tears, and plates of food pressed into my hands at receptions. Strangers treated me as though I had been part of their story all along, and slowly I began to believe it. At night, when I returned to the cottage, I would sit on the porch, listening to the marsh shift with the tide. Instead of replaying old arguments or silent meals, my mind filled with laughter from the day. The absence of family no longer echoed as loudly. It was being replaced, thread by thread, with new voices. I didn't think of it as starting over yet, but each weekend, each smile from a grateful couple stitched me more firmly into the fabric of a life that finally felt my own. And it was in that quiet sense of belonging that the first message from the past finally found its way back to me. It came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was laying out ribbons for another ceremony. My old phone, the one I rarely touched, buzzed against the counter. The screen showed his name. For a moment I froze. Then curiosity, or maybe habit, made me press play. His voice was sharp. Nothing like the boy I once held close. "Mom, what did you do? The account's frozen. We can't access anything. Aaron is furious. Do you have any idea what kind of position you've put us in?" The words tumbled out angry and entitled, as though I had taken something that belonged to him. I stood in the kitchen listening until the message ended. There was no pause for concern, no hint of regret, no acknowledgement of what he had said to me at the rehearsal. Just anger at the sudden end of an endless supply. For years I had answered every call, every request, every need. This time, I pressed delete. The silence that followed was clean, almost refreshing. I slipped the phone back into the drawer and turned toward the table where flowers waited to be arranged. My hands moved steadily, weaving stems together, the simple rhythm anchoring me in the present. By afternoon, Dana and I were setting up in a sunlit meadow, laughter from the couple carrying across the field. I found myself smiling at their joy, my body lighter, for having shed the weight of that message. For once, the past had knocked on the door, and I hadn't let it back in. That night, I sat on the porch of the cottage, the marsh glowing under a pale moon. The anger in his voice replayed, once then faded, leaving only the sound of crickets. I realized it no longer had the power to shake me. The cage I had lived in for years, guilt obligation, endless sacrifice was gone. I leaned back, breathing in the salt air, and let the quiet hold me. Tomorrow, another wedding would need my hands, another couple would trust me to steady their day, and for the first time I felt certain that I could keep moving forward without ever looking over my shoulder again. The meadow was alive with color. That morning, wildflowers bending in the breeze, the sky a soft stretch of pale blue. Dana and I had been working since dawn, tying ribbons to chairs, setting lanterns along the path, arranging blossoms in jars that caught the sunlight. By the time guests began to arrive, everything glowed as though the day itself had been waiting for this moment. The bride's hands trembled when she took her bouquet. I steadied her fingers, whispering that it was natural, that nerves were part of the memory she'd carry forever. Her eyes filled with tears, but she laughed, and some of the fear fell away. The groom paced nearby, straightening his tie until I touched his shoulder and told him he looked ready. He smiled, grateful for the reassurance. When the music began, I stepped aside, hidden in the wings of the day I had helped create. The couple walked toward each other down the makeshift aisle, eyes locked, voices breaking as they spoke their vows. I watched quietly as they sealed their promise with a kiss, the meadow erupting in cheers. Afterward, they sought me out, their gratitude spilling over in words and embraces. "You made this possible," the bride whispered, her cheeks damp. The groom nodded, his voice unsteady, as he thanked me for giving them a day they could never have imagined. I felt their joy more deeply than I expected, not because it was mine, but because I had finally given something without being diminished in return. My role was invisible to most, yet essential, and that was enough. As I stepped back to the edge of the field, lanterns flickering in the late light, I understood the truth. I hadn't disappeared to punish my son. I had disappeared to save myself, to find a place where I could stand without shame, where what I offered mattered. The meadow grew quieter as evening settled, laughter drifting on the wind, and I knew I had walked into a different kind of aisle, one that belonged entirely to me.